Today's scripture is taken from 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10. And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing I pleaded with the Lord 3 times, that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly, I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong.
There at 2 Corinthians chapter 12, where we spend most of our time this morning. And this is the last lesson that we're doing in a series on prayer that I started a few weeks ago. And this lesson, I got inspiration from this meme that crossed my Facebook page a couple of weeks ago. And it's people obviously at a gravesite. You got a person there, right there, who's kind of priestly garb. The robes, and it says, we are gathered here today because your prayers didn't work. And I made a response. Here's my statement here, where I asked, how do you know? Because sometimes we pray for someone to pass peacefully so their suffering is at an end. Even if you pray for someone to be healed, the answer might be no, because there is no such thing as an unanswered prayer. Here's an atheist reply about how I'm rationalizing. It's kind of a long one, but I'm rationalizing. He doesn't think prayers are answered because he obviously doesn't believe there's a God. And then the person who made the original post for this said that, told the other atheists that you and I are voicing the same logic, but it will fall on deaf ears. Indoctrinated theists are impervious to reason, and Steve's excuse is just maddening. And then I thought of this. If you're a country music fan, and if you're old enough to remember, when Garth Brooks did a song called Unanswered Prayers. Anybody remember that? No country music fans? Oh, well, that's okay. But it's a song, for those who don't remember it, or who don't listen to country music, it's a song about a man who takes his wife and they go back to his high school football game. And he happens to run into his high school girlfriend. And he makes the introductions, and as they're watching the game, he starts thinking about the way things used to be, the way things were when he was in school. And he starts to reminisce and thinks about how she was the one I wanted for all times, the song says. Each night I spent praying that God would make her mine. And if you'd only grant me this one wish, I wish back then I'd never ask for anything again. That sound familiar? How many of us, when we were kids, we'd ask Mom or Dad, would you just buy me this bike? Or for those of us who remember, record albums? And I'll never ask for anything again. Anybody ever say something like that to your parents? Did your kids ever say anything like that to you? Okay, now be honest. How many of you actually never asked for anything else? That's what I thought. It didn't last, did it? The song then goes on to say, here's the chorus. Sometimes I thank God for unanswered prayers. Remember, when you're talking to the man upstairs, just because he doesn't answer doesn't mean he don't care. Some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers. In other words, he's glad he didn't get that woman he was dating in high school, because he could see that she had changed over time, and he had changed over time, and it just wouldn't have worked. But is that really the case? Here's another one. Remember a few weeks ago in the first lesson in this series, I told you about a woman who had been to the doctor, got a prescription, she's on her way home, she's got to go to Walmart for it, it's Wednesday, pulls into the parking lot, and it just starts pouring rain. She's going up and down trying to find a parking spot. She's got to get the prescription, got to get home, got to get supper cooked, got to get to Wednesday night Bible study. Lord, you know, she starts praying, Lord, you know what a day I've had. Could you help me get a parking spot close to the door? And right as she's turning down the aisle, right the first spot past the handicap slot, there's backup lights. And it's coming out, and she sees it, and she just looks, oh, never mind, Lord, something just opened up. Or, how many of you, and people have told me this, where you're tearing the house apart, you've got to go, you're behind schedule, and you can't find your car keys. Lord, where are my car keys? Oh, there they are over here on the shelf. Or you can't find that cup of coffee you sat down somewhere. And you start going, Lord, what did I do with my coffee? Oh, here it is over here, right where I left it. And those are pretty simple, easy, kind of who cares things. Where's my coffee? But now let's look at something that might be a little bit more serious. You got a loved one that's lying in a hospital bed with cancer. Or Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. Pick your chronic or your long-term condition. And you've been praying for this person to get well. And you're getting not only frustrated, but discouraged. Like we talked about today in the adult Bible class, dealing with discouragement. Now, why would God help you find something seemingly so insignificant as your car keys or answer a prayer like that, but he doesn't answer my prayer about grandma or my mom or whoever it is that's there in the hospital bed? We all got stories like that in our lives, don't we? Maybe I've been out of work for 6 or 8 or 10 months, and I really am trying to find a job, but nothing's happening. And it looks like God is sitting there not doing anything. And then something like this happens where somebody has died and, well, God didn't answer my prayer. Now, we like to all get yes answers to our prayers, don't we? But now let me ask you this. Can you honestly say that throughout your life, every request you've ever made of anybody has always been answered with a yes? Did you always get that raise you asked for when you went into the box? Did you always get that candy bar when you're standing in that impulse buy section they have at the grocery store with all the tabloids and the chocolate bars and the beef jerky? And my 8-year-old grabs one off and, Dad, can I have this? And I say, no. Oh, come on, no. And we go back and forth. She finally puts it back. Now, she made a request. Did she get an answer? Was it the answer she wanted? Have you always gotten the answer you wanted? And when we don't get the answers that we want in life from humans, why should we expect a yes answer every time from God? I mean, we're going to look at a couple times here where God said no. Here's one of them. Matthew records that Jesus went a little bit further. And remember, this is just before he goes to the cross. He's about to be betrayed. And he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Did Jesus make a request? Was it answered yes? The answer was no. And nevertheless, though, notice, not as I will, but you. If there's some way we can do this without me going to the cross, let's do it. But if we can't, then whatever your will is, that's what I will. So today we're going to look at somebody else, the Apostle Paul. Now, if ever there was a time, or a person, I should say, who deserved to walk right up to the throne of God and say, "God, here's what I want," and get it, it was Paul. Keep in mind all the things he went through in his life. He was beaten. He was shipwrecked, put in jail, had all these things go on. They tried to kill him. But yet, he kept pressing on. Like Jesus even said in the Sermon on the Mount, to pray that your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That was Paul's prayer. That was Jesus' prayer. And if anybody deserved that, yes, it was Paul. Paul wrote about half the New Testament. We're not sure who wrote Hebrews, but if he wrote that one, that's about 13 books out of 27 that he wrote. And what was his reward? Did God say, "Okay, Paul, you've gone through all this. I'm going to get you a nice retirement villa there on the Mediterranean somewhere with a nice mild climate year-round, and you can just sit back and enjoy the rest of your days"? Is that anywhere in Scripture? If it is, would you show it to me? Because I don't see it. Instead, what I see is the text that was read for us just a minute ago. And we see there are going to be times that God says no. And in our text, and you can see there's even the reason here for it, that lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan. And notice he prayed 3 times, and we're going to dig a little deeper and see what that means, to pray 3 times for it to go away. And here's the answer he got. My grace is sufficient for you. No, Paul, I'm not going to take it away. And notice that when Paul made this prayer, this is what we could call trouble with a purpose. Look at verse 7. Lest I should be exalted above measure. I'm wondering, this is probably Paul's, maybe a weakness he had. That he sometimes got a little bit of an inflated ego. Because notice that Satan brought something into Paul's life. But God is not only going to allow it, but he's going to use it. I'm sure Paul didn't want this. I mean, he's flat out, it pretty much says here. But God is going to allow it, and God is going to use it. Remember, it's not about getting our way, it's about surrendering our will to God. I don't understand, God, why you're doing this. And I really wish you would do this or that or do something else. But you're not. But I'm just going to trust. I'm just going to trust you that you're doing this and it's going to pan out for me. Proverbs 19, we'll look at that in just a minute, but look at this word torment or buffet that Paul uses here. This is a tough word. This is one that means that you're hit hard like with knuckles. It's a blow meant to crush. It's a word that the Romans would use to describe driving somebody through with a stake or a big spear. It's not just the little thorns that are irritating, like in your garden. If you're gardening and you get like a rose bush or something, and the little thorns prick you, and they might cut. But this is something far more serious. This is something that would definitely require some kind of medical attention if it was physical. But he says it was given to me and God allowed it. Proverbs 19, many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. And we continually strive. We continually try to put our own plans in. Our hearts and our minds and our future and our hopes have all got these big plans. But it is God's plan and His purpose that will stand. Sometimes we have to take some time to try and figure it out. The Lord's counsel will stand. It is established. God does not change. Jesus doesn't change. They're still the same. And Paul needed a thorn to keep him mindful that he was no better than anybody else. He is totally dependent on God and what God can do for him. And this goes back to the idea of keeping his feet planted on the ground. Whatever this thorn in the flesh was. There's been a lot of guesses. We don't know what it was. But he tells us there really why he had it. That he had all these revelations. God had really been using him. And that could foster some pride. So that brings us then to, okay, so exactly who's in charge here? We got to remember, we're not in charge. We're not in control of a lot of things in life. But this should keep us close to the one who is. I can go out and get in my car and go get on the interstate and go to wherever I'm headed, pointed whatever direction. I've got my car under control as I go 70 miles an hour down the road. But what about that car coming the other way? How much control do I have over that vehicle? 0. None. If he loses control and comes over the median and right into me, I can't do anything about that. If I'm pulling up to an intersection, I've got a green light, but the guy coming the other way has a red light, either doesn't see it, and in the last couple of months I've seen at least 2 people blatantly run red lights around here. Fortunately, nobody was coming the other way. What control does anybody have over that? I can't control it, nobody can. There's a lot going on that we cannot control, so we have to keep our attention on the Lord. And keep our attention on the one who can do something about it. And what Paul's thorn was really, it doesn't matter to us. All that really matters is the lesson that he got from it that we can apply today. Whether it was opponents, whether it was poor eyesight, whatever. If been a lot of speculation. It's really not relevant to us, but Paul acknowledged the one who could remove it, and that was the Lord. So he's praying for relief. He is agony. This isn't just asking, oh, hey, by the way, Lord, could you take this thorn away? He is pleading. He is begging for God to take away this thorn. It's an intense desire he's got that this thorn just be gone. I just can't. It's getting more. I'm just having a tough time handling it. It is painful. It is causing me a lot of problems. Would you please remove it? Just begging like that. And after the third time, he realized, okay, maybe this thorn has a purpose. Maybe there's a reason here that I've got it. And he says, lest he be exalted above measure, this will keep my feet planted on the ground. This will keep my head screwed on straight because I've got this thorn. And his prayer may be drawing a deliberate parallel to that whole the prayer that Jesus had in Gethsemane, where Jesus was really praying hard, and I got to break that down here in just a minute, for the cup to pass from him. But Paul here is just pleading. This is a very intensive, focused prayer that he's got about this thorn in the flesh, whatever it was. He's really wanting it to go away. And then as Jesus, though, accepted the cross, Paul is resigned himself to submit himself to God's will. Jesus, even though he was praying fervently and wanted this to pass from him, he just, Lord, whatever it is that you want. And Paul's resigned himself. He's going to submit to God's will about his weakness, and he's going to just go on. And we'll see in just a minute what that is, why that is significant. But sometimes we just have to learn to accept what is inescapable. A lot of times there is going to be a lesson. We don't always get it right away, but down the road we just might. We might find that we are mistaken sometimes about what we think is best for us and for God's work. And I go back to that song by Garth Brooks. How it took him till years later to look back and say, yeah, you know what? Good thing I didn't marry her. Don't raise your hand, but can any of us look back to a situation like that? Maybe a high school or a college sweetheart, and we can look back to, ooh, why that didn't work. Or a job. Over the years, I've known a few people who really wanted a job. In fact, there was one time we were interviewing with a church out in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Went out there, it all looked good, and nothing happened. We were both kind of disappointed by that. And then about a year and a half later, I noticed they were looking again. Now, when we went out there were about 105 or 10 members. They had, I think, 4 or 5 elders and a bunch of deacons running around, very involved. A year and a half later, I noticed there were no elders, no deacons, and about 50 people. And something happened. I don't know what, but something happened in that time that we interviewed in this time. It looks to me like we probably did pretty well by not getting that offer, whatever it was. I have no idea what it was. But I'm just guessing that I'm going to go out on a limb and say it was a good thing we didn't get that. Paul wanted God to remove this thorn. Notice it's really bothering him. And some of us might have a physical ailment or a spiritual or some other ailment that is just bothering us. And the thorn in the flesh, or something we're really praying for. Maybe it's not a thorn in the flesh, but I'm really praying for a person to get well or something, and it just doesn't seem like anything's happening, and then it becomes a distraction. Personal things do have a way of distracting us from other things, don't they? If we're in pain physically or emotionally or mentally, we're in pain, we're struggling, and it's hard to concentrate on our work at the office or at school or whatever it is that we've got to concentrate on. And then finally he says it made him appear weak and sickly. Nobody likes to appear weak or sickly. We like to be the epitome of health. We like to try and hold up as best we can and then maybe get out of the car or get home and then, crouch over and grab the small of my back now because I can really feel the pain because I don't have to impress anybody. That's kind of Paul. He was just, it made him appear weak, can't concentrate on my work, or whatever the Lord wants me to do. He's prayed 3 times for this to go away, just like Jesus prayed 3 times in the garden. And why did God tell him no? That's basically what God said. No, I'm not taking this away from you. Number one, it prevented him from getting puffed up. Kind of hard to get a big ego if you keep getting put back down, isn't it? And I thought of this as I was putting together this lesson. I'll tell you some people I thought of. I thought of some professional athletes. And a couple of times where in the week leading up to the Super Bowl, now I really don't think God cares who wins the Super Bowl or the World Series. Okay, yeah, that might, for some certain fans who think that their team is God's team, that might, puncture your ego a little bit. But God really doesn't care. But suppose in using a Super Bowl loss, let's just say, he can teach a lesson in humility. I remember one year when the Carolina Panthers and the Broncos were in the Super Bowl together, and one of the quarterbacks was really bragging in the week leading up to it, and ended up the game was a blowout. And sometimes I've wondered when I see that, because that's one of the biggest single-day sporting events in the world, I watch some of those and I wonder, maybe God is using this blowout loss in a sporting event to teach somebody a lesson. I mean, just think, you're the starting quarterback. Hey, we're going to go out and do this. We will win on Sunday. I guarantee it. And then God says, oh yeah, watch this. And it's a 30 or 40 point blowout. Or somebody who's getting in and this has happened, I noticed with some song leaders years ago that I knew, who was really bragging about how good he was coming and how well he was doing. He got up to lead a song, and instead of starting with the top line, he started with the chorus. And everybody was, huh? And later he came and said, yeah, that was a very big piece of humble pie I got there. There are events like that can happen. That God looks at you and says, it's about time you learn some humility. And I can tell you this, nothing is going to teach you more humility than to get up in front of a bunch of people and just totally blow something. And if you've ever given a speech or been in a sporting event where it just went completely wrong, you know what I'm talking about. Secondly, God wanted to show his power through Paul. How can God show his strength if we do everything right and we're completely perfect all the time? This shows how God can really work through us, and it is God's power that is doing the work that is really causing the increase. My strength is made perfect in weakness, God says. And then finally, he wants him to teach Paul to live for Christ's sake. To live for Christ, put your attention, Paul, where it needs to be. And then, sometimes we want it my way. Remember those old Burger King ads? All we ask is that you let us serve it your way. I can't find that anywhere in the Bible, can you? It might work at Burger King. It might work at any other restaurant. Or hey, this isn't what I want, you can send it back. But with God, it might not work that way. Prayer is not about it. We said this earlier. I'll say it again. It's not about getting our way. Sometimes it's just about surrendering your will to God. Bible character that comes to mind who learned this the hard way, what about Jonah? Didn't he learn this the hard way? I want you to go to Nineveh. Nineveh's that way, I'm going that way. Oh, wait a minute, Jonah, come back here. Prayer isn't about just getting your way, it's about surrendering to God. God does not exist to serve us like a genie in a bottle. Or like somebody you might hire to do work around the house, or like a waitress down here at the restaurant. I mean, that's what they're there for, is to get you ordered, get it right, get it the way you want it. The person I hire to come in maybe and clean the house, do the yard, do whatever the work is, they're there to do it because I want it this way, and here's how I'm paying for it. But with God, it doesn't work that way. So we are to continually seek after God. Seek after what God's will is in a situation, believing and trusting. Here again, if we got everything we wanted in prayer, where would there be a need for faith or trust? If everything had to work out exactly as I wanted it? Because it's not just going to God with what I want, but it's trusting God that God knows what's best. Like when we were kids, we would do with our parents. How many times did you try to do something, Mom or Dad would say, don't do that? Go ahead. Yeah, some of you are already like, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to buy this car, or I'm going to date this person, even though Mom said not to. In fact, for some of us, that might have been the red flag to the bull. I'm just going to, if I say, that there's always that one person, if you say don't do that, they're going to do it. I may or may not have been that person. I can neither confirm or deny. But you go ahead and you buy that car, or you do it, and then, the car falls apart, the relationship doesn't work. You know what? Dad or Mom might have known maybe what they were talking about. God is going to work that way too. God sometimes knows what he's talking about, doesn't he? And remember, God told Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. I've given you my favor, Paul, my unmerited favor to you. So whatever the thorn in the flesh is, I'm not taking that away. And we have to remember that there's a different perspective once we go through something. Because now Paul experienced Christ's power in a way he never would have if God had said, all right, Paul, take the thorn away. Now he can see what it really means to rely on Christ, to rely on God. And he never would have chosen these, I have no doubt. But because he experienced the presence and the power of God, it's okay. Look back through your life. Aren't there times that you went through rough periods, rough patches? I would never choose to do that again. But I can see the power of God and how God's hand worked in it. I mean, it took me months or years after the fact, because 2020, in our hindsight, remember, is always 2020. And I always look back and say, well, yeah, I should have turned right there instead of turning left, but we learned those lessons. We learned some of them the hard way. Paul's ministry was more powerful because God didn't do what Paul wanted. And that changed his perspective. Okay, so what if we change our perspective? Instead of complaining about my ailment, what if I just said, yeah, I don't really like these headaches, I hate them, I wish they'd go away, but because of the grace of God, I can handle it. I don't like that job. The boss is annoying. The guy in the next cubicle to me is bad. But I can be thankful I have a job. I can be thankful I've got a way to take care of my family. How do you get through that? The grace of God. And then that can open up some doors. One of the first religious conversations I remember having with someone was he'd been in the Air Force for a long time, and I asked him how come he got out. And he said, the Lord let me out. And that led to some more conversations there. And over time, his perspective changed as he looked back. We can see life much more clearly with hindsight. Time heals all wounds, we're told, but our healing, our real healing, is going to come from the presence and the power of God. Amen. Even though I'm dealing with physical or mental or emotional pain, even though my world is collapsing around me, we can still look to God, look to the peace and all the things that He will comfort, all the things that He provides for us that we wouldn't get otherwise. All of us have got situations in life that we don't like. All of us have got times in life, I really wish that I had made another choice. But we continue asking, we continue believing, we continue praying. Here's the thing. There is no such thing as an unanswered prayer. Your prayers are answered. We all just have to be prepared at times to accept the fact that the answer is going to be no. Or maybe it might even be wait now. Remember when we were kids and we wanted a particular gift. I want this bicycle, but wait, your birthday's in 2 weeks. Wait. Or the answer might be no. That's in each given situation, my situation, God might say yes, you are the same one, God might say no. You just have to remember there are times God will say no. So this morning, as we're coming to a close, I would just ask, do you have something on your heart that you'd like to share for prayers? We can pray with you. You'll get an answer. Or are you willing and ready to say yes to God if you have? To say yes to being immersed, to have your sins forgiven, and coming up to walk a new life. And if we can help you with any of that, let us know as we